resume the recording. Good morning, folks. I'm going to go ahead and put a little poll up, and while we wait for people to join, as people roll in, they can fill in the poll and let us know who you are, what your role is in your organization.
That's a good question. This hour or next hour?
Right now. Who are you right now?
I'm going to say other.
Lyle's having trouble connecting into the audio. Hopefully he gets connected in.
Hopefully people aren't having too much trouble finding their links.
Well, hopefully they're finding it in the email, and they're logged in. It should be out on the website now, too.
Because there are quite a few people signed up, so it may just take a little while.
We'll give them a few minutes here to roll in. It's early in the morning after a holiday weekend, and again, a lot of people are signing up. They're developing this bad habit of signing up for lots of stuff and then going back and watching the videos later. And what we want to do is try and get people to start getting in the habit of having actual roundtable conversations and building the community up, and not just consuming the information, but having some virtual face-to-face conversations. So we'll get there. We got a win here. So if you're in a spot where your audio is iffy or your video is iffy, if your bandwidth is problematic because you're sharing it, or you're got lots of people working from home or school at home and you're preserving bandwidth, completely understand that. So hopefully you can use the chat. We will have the chat window up as well. So to practice using the chat, in the chat, why doesn't everybody tell us what their favorite recreational activity was this past weekend? Here in the U.S., we had a long weekend, so people had some extra time and had some interesting things going on. So what cool, relaxing thing did you get to do over the weekend in the chat? And that way we can get people used to some exchanges there as well. Oh, David, very cool bike riding. Is that a special thing for you, David, or do you guys bike ride on a regular occasion?
No, my wife and I both have bikes. We do a lot around our neighborhood, but every once in a while we throw them on the back of the car and find a rail trail or something near where we are just to take a look at the scenery. We went down and did a reservoir in southern New York State not too long ago, a man-made reservoir, but it's very fun.
Wow.
Yeah, we had a beautiful day to do that not too long ago.
Nice. I'm impressed. Laziness is it's almost like an activity in itself in today's crazy world with so much going on and constantly working from home and kind of work never ending. Carving out the time to just be lazy and refresh is, I think, an important thing. So I'm glad to hear you guys, Brian and Carmen, you both had some time to just chill. That's awesome. I need to do slightly more of that. I've got a book I'm not quite done yet. All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started and get kicked off. If you've had a chance to go in and fill in the poll and let us know who you are, I'm going to give you about another 2 seconds, and then we'll close that out so everybody can see kind of who the other people here in the room are. Again, we're trying to encourage conversation and the exchange of ideas as we go through these sessions. Great, Quinn. We appreciate you. I know your time shifted significantly, so appreciate that you're here at this time. Somebody was going to say something? Okay. So I'm popping out. You can see the results. It looks like we've got a pretty split between people who are analysts or people who are running an organization. So glad to have all those perspectives here with us. And then also have some people here who are a different IT role, so not in the IT finance role, which is awesome, right? We want to encourage that cross-exchange of ideas as we go through this. We're going to actually try and touch base at each session and find out what people do. So it'll be interesting to see how this changes and shifts as the day goes on. And we'll share that out in a little blog post at the end of all of this. So this morning we wanted to kick off a value summit, kind of talking about what is value and what can you measure to really talk about and realize business value, because our experience has been that if you don't measure something, nothing ever changes, right? Like if people don't have a target, if they're not looking at what you're measuring, you're just never going to make progress. But if you measure the wrong thing, it can drive you off of a cliff, right? And one of my favorite classic examples of this are people who are building service cost models and decide to come up with a cost per ticket and charge the business a cost per ticket, which then immediately results in the business not calling the help desk anymore, which is exactly the wrong thing that we want to happen. So it's important to have metrics, but it's also important to carefully think about those metrics. So I wanted to spend some time this morning with us talking about this. When I work with clients and we look at kind of what people consider their advanced KPIs, for us this is just kind of a starting point, right? But people who generally consider themselves fairly advanced will be looking at things like project statuses, right? So they're not just looking at dollars, they're looking at the balance of all of IT performance, so cost, value, risk, and quality, which is great. And so they might even have like a really nice heat map of critical project status, which is great, right? They might be looking at their spend to budget variance. So that is important, right? If they're considering themselves advanced, then they're going to not just be looking at snapshots, but they're going to be looking at trends and they're going to be looking at variance. Might be by a cost center or some other organizational unit, or it might be by a tower or a function, depending on how they have mapped themselves up. They might be looking at quality, right? They might be looking at priority 1 tickets, incidents, things like that. They might even be doing a little bit of workforce and starting to dig into the internal IT workforce. But none of these are what we would call value metrics. So I'm curious. We want to look at this, and I'm going to put another poll up here. We'll stop sharing these. Let's pull up the other poll. And I'm interested as we start. Do you guys currently use what you would consider value metrics in your KPIs, dashboards, or analytics? So before we start the dive into what a value metric is, I'm curious as to your perspective on this and whether or not you currently have any value metrics that you are measuring. So I'll give you just a minute or two here to I'd like to try and get at least 70–75% of you guys responding. Awesome. And so the overwhelming response that I'm seeing here is no, not yet. So hopefully this then can be the launch of something that changes how you guys think about IT. And so you just heard me rattle off, right, cost, value, risk, satisfaction, or quality. Those are kind of the cornerstones of the metrics that we talk about, talking about what to measure for service value. Today we're going to talk, yes. Does someone have a question? Okay. Today we're going to talk briefly about cost, but I really want to focus on value. And we'll actually break and have a little discussion around value when we get to that point as well. So most CIOs have basic data that they ask for around cost, right? And their biggest concerns are usually things like, is my spending on track, right? Have we spent the right amount of money? Are we spending too much? Are we spending not enough? You know, are we going to have enough to get us through where we need to be before the end of the year? So they're kind of tracking that spend. They might even be looking at it as a balance of run, grow, transform, or initiative versus operations, or invest versus OpEx. However they're breaking that down, they might not just be looking at total dollars. They might be thinking about it a little bit more, which starts us on that value conversation, right? Hopefully, they're looking a little bit on how their IT spend is aligned with corporate initiatives or corporate capabilities. And more advanced CIOs may already start asking you how you're impacting business revenue. But I would challenge you to start presenting information that maybe they're not even asking for yet. And to help push this discussion by looking at things like not just what my total spend was, but what has been the trend in our spend variance to budget for each run, grow, transform category, or initiatives, OpEx, however you guys split that out. So that's actually a really interesting question, and I'm not going to pull that, but in the chat window, I'd be interested to know, in your organization, do you talk more about run, grow, transform? Do you talk about invest, operations? Do you talk about initiative versus maintenance? Like what is the language that you guys use in your organization for looking at breaking down spend according to how that spend is going to impact the organization? Are you using that run, grow, transform, or are you using something else? So if you could, in the chat, type in the language that you guys use around that kind of initiative. So run and initiatives, okay. Anyone else? Thanks, Wynn. Carmen, Greg, how about you guys? How do you talk about spend? Initiatives versus maintenance, okay. And we're seeing that more and more, that the fuzziness between grow and transform was difficult for everybody. Yet breaking the initiatives down to a small enhance versus strategic, yeah. And I think that makes, it's language that makes more sense for people. Okay. So focusing on controlling the spend, that's important before you jump too far. Although you'll see, talking with Ginger in our next session, that even early on, you can have some really interesting value conversations. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion. You can start to look at things, though, by like That's great, Brian. I'm glad that you guys are working on shifting the conversation. And you guys all have the ability, you should have the ability to unmute yourself, so feel free to speak up, right? So this is, again, we're trying to do some roundtable discussion and get people hearing other voices and building those relationships. What you got, Wyndham? I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, hello everyone. Okay, so my name's Wyndham. I'm from South Africa. I couldn't really interact at the beginning of the session. I was trying to wrap up another meeting. Just thought I'd take the opportunity since you opened it, Nan, and just say hello to everyone.
Absolutely. And we're looking very much forward to your session later today as well, Wynn. I know that you'll be joining us pretty late your time, so we appreciate that with the time shift. We're finding that the challenges that people have are very global, and it really doesn't matter where you're from. Everybody's facing the same kinds of challenges and movements. So the more voices we can get in the conversation, the better. Sometimes if you're like, okay, like thinking about initiatives versus operations or doing, like setting targets for transformation, right? Like, okay, that's way too mature for me. Think about just simple things like, can you calculate the IT cost per head in your organization? Right? If you have that data that's coming into you and you have a head count for your organization, you can start to look at very simple metrics like your IT cost as your percent of revenue, right? Or your IT cost to onboard, which might be a little trickier, but still is very focused on data that you guys control. And are metrics that you can start to present that actually have meaning to the business and not just to IT. And so when the CIO can take these kinds of statistics and measurements out to the rest of the organization, it helps them to boost that conversation forward. So you guys may have seen this before. This is our maturity value curve. And we found, and what we've really structured for today is that no matter where you are in this journey, you can have value discussions and you can measure value to the business, right? You don't have to be like, oh, I have an optimized portfolio and I've been doing this for 5 years and now we're excellent, right? Even when you're just still trying to control costs, there are discussions you can have around this. So I'm curious where we are and where you would place your organization in this journey. And so looking at IT cost management, where you're really focused on improving your data quality, trying to just measure some basic TCO of what IT is doing. How do you start to improve your vendor management? You probably don't have a service cost model at this point. You may not even have services at this point, right? But then at internal transparency is where you're starting to build that service culture and really manage your data quality, start to define your business services. You may be mapping to some business capabilities as well there, and starting to really optimize IT. So this is still IT thinking about itself and growing and being better about what it's doing, but with some mapping at the business capability level and starting to think about business services of preparing for that conversation for external transparency, right? So these are people who may be doing a showback or a chargeback, and are starting to be able to communicate cost, quality, and value trade-offs. So they're giving actionable levers to the organization. And they're able to define a business capability or maybe an application portfolio and talk about the TCO of applications, which is sometimes a challenge, as we'll find out with our conversation with Wynn later today. And start to really do better at justifying your IT investments that the rest of the organization is making. So I see a couple of you are like, oh, I don't think we're even on the chart yet. And I would tell you that no matter how immature you think you are, you're somewhere here in cost management, right? You may not have gotten good at these activities, but but there is in every organization that we've worked with at least some desire to start to control costs, right? So you're trying to do some cost management. It looks like we've got somebody who's doing some external transparency, so doing showback or chargeback on at least some of their services. And somebody who is working on demand management, which is awesome. So Brian, you can go ahead and you can unmute if you want. I agree, cost management is not the same as cost control.
That's the first area you have to get over, is change the conversation far enough they understand the difference between managing cost and just holding controlling cost.
Right, and so getting them to a mindset where they want to actively manage things, right, and they're not just reactive all the time and kind of controlling things, but trying to manage it in a proactive way with reports and data that give them insights, right? But I would tell you that, no matter where you are here, and we'll talk to people at all different stages of this journey today, you're going to be able to see good value. So if you're not talking value yet, here are some ways that we think you can start to help people in IT to understand business value. And I'd be interested in ways that you guys have either done this or that you're thinking about it, or ideas that occur to you as we're talking here today. So one of those is thinking about what's the business value of the services you deliver. So whether it's email or a PeopleSoft license or the ability to process claims if you're an insurance company, or the ability to approve a loan, or the ability to manufacture a widget, right? Like whatever that business value is, how do your services plug into the value stream of what your organization as a whole is doing? And so understanding that value stream then becomes important, right? So you can't just live in IT. You have to have at least some people who really interact with and understand what's happening with the wider organization, because if that organization doesn't thrive, then IT doesn't have any reason to be here, right? If that seems daunting, you can start with just the realized impact of projects. So sometimes projects and that invest money is easier to get people to focus on. And so you can start to look at, are we actually measuring of whether we actually realized what we said we were going to do? So almost everybody has a process that they go through for project approval where you have to say what the ROI is going to be, right? Almost nobody has a process where they go back after the project and actually measure or affirm of whether they achieved the ROI that they said they were going to. So I'm really interested in the chat. Let me know, do you guys currently have a process that goes back after the project to measure and validate the ROI, yes or no? So are you guys actively validating the ROI of projects? And don't be like, oh, that's embarrassing, I can't tell you, because I'm telling you right now that, yeah, Brian's like, no, we don't, right? So almost nobody does this. So I'm actually kind of looking for if there are any exceptions for people who do, so you can kind of share with everybody else how that goes. So don't be afraid to say no here. And so this is an easy place to start, right? The documentation already exists. Everybody's already measured what they think it's supposed to do.
It can be a good place to start, but a hard conversation, because a lot of people don't want to go back and look because they have this gut feeling that they didn't make it. And that calls into question all the fancy proposals they're putting up now. Even in a mature organization, it can be a difficult conversation.
It's true, and I think there has to be a little bit of a culture of this is not penalized, right? Like, you're not going to get in trouble if you didn't make it at this point, but we never get better at understanding and measuring what our value is if we don't actually measure what our value is. And so if we said, hey, this project's going to realize a $5 million gain, and then we come back and later it only really came back to $1.5 million, then we learn from what was the gap, like why didn't it, right? And so really it has to have a culture around it of learning and exploration when you launch this, and not of we're going to be measuring whether you actually did this or not, and if you didn't, there's going to be, the rolling eyes and somebody's hand's going to get slapped. So it needs to be done with the intent of maturing the organization and not something that's a penalty. So I think that's a really important part, Brian, absolutely.
Dan, the other thing I would add is, that can be complex because you're talking about the large scope of a project and whatever. What we've done is we have monthly business relationship management meetings with our customers. Mm-hmm. And I always made it a point to describe some of the services that we accomplished in the month, even though they might seem painfully obvious. And even my colleagues would say, well, it's so obvious, why are we stating it, right? But they're paying you money for your IT services. So we would say, we produced 340,000 pieces of correspondence that were mailed out on time, right? And we produced X number of checks so that your customers got their monthly pension benefit. And we onboarded 35 new staff and 6 people left, et cetera. So, there was always constant discussion about, well, it's so obvious, but I think in a way it is obvious, but you're bringing the value, you're identifying the value that you bring for the dollars that they're expending, right? So it's not a guess, right? And the metrics are there and we have them, right? We're providing you. So that sort of also helps to, I don't want to say undermine, maybe mitigate the problems that they were going to bring to the table. Because it seems often your discussions are about all the things that went wrong. Here are some of the positive things that we did this month on behalf of you in the business. So
that's awesome. I love that, David. And starting it, even if it's like, oh, we produced this many checks, we sent this many pieces of correspondence, it starts to get to opening that discussion of the business value, right? So either one of two things is going to happen. Either, come back. Either the business person is going to be like, well, why did you do that? I know of a client where they reviewed this and they were like, hey, and we spent this much money and we had this many systems up and running for this application. And they were like, well, didn't we retire that application? Well, you said you wanted it up and running because you needed to be able to pull the archives, and the business was like, well, I had no idea it was going to take that much infrastructure and be that expensive and be that difficult. Let's get rid of it, right? I don't need it that badly. I could do this another way. Or they're going to go, oh, that's great. Like, I'm so glad, like, you sent all these checks out and people are really happy, and then that also gives IT an opening to kind of go, so what would happen if we didn't do that? Like what? And by knowing that, then you can start to understand what the value is of how they're measuring the value, right? Like, oh, well, people's uninsurance, their unemployment checks that wouldn't have gone out and it would have had this impact, or whatever that impact is. That's a great place to start that discussion. So I really, really like that you guys do that. That's very, very, very cool, David. Thank you for sharing that.
But you can find, if you start pulling metrics on projects and analyzing, you find some interesting data that you weren't aware of. Did this on the back of my previous employer. Towards the end of the program, they finally let us start pulling that data in. My focus was, okay, how good are we at estimating project cost up front? Because everybody says, well, this project is going to generate this much revenue and it's going to cost this much. But if you're really, really bad at estimating costs, you need to know that or you'll never get better.
Right.
Discovering that on some projects, 60% of the manpower cost was the PMO office was an eye-opener.
Wow. Yeah. That's a huge eye-opener.
They didn't
So
want
yeah,
to talk.
again, your numbers might not be perfect. Just like starting on a service costing journey, right? Like the numbers, you get them directionally correct, and then you mature it and refine it as you go forward. And so as you're measuring value and coming up with how you measure the value, it's not going to be perfect the first time you do it, but that's just because there are things you don't know yet. And so it has to be a learning process. But if you don't start the conversation, you can't ever learn and get better, right? It could just be as simple as, what projects are tied to improving your business service values. Hey, Win, you raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I agree with you that your data will never be ready, or not, let's say not ready, but right and perfect the first time. But it's worth going through the exercise the first time. And I must just be honest with a piece of experience that I've had with this whole journey of ours is that you start submitting the results on the first time, knowing that your data is, let's say, 70% accurate. And the increased, let's say, value that you're gaining on the data and being able to present this information to people allows them this opportunity to then contest that data. And so you get this Newton's law where for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, and people start pushing back against it. And I think it's really important for us all to recognize that pushback is good, because it means that people are looking at their costs and starting to understand and manage, and will help you refine those metrics that you're working on.
That's a great point, and I think it's not, even if it's just, well, that's not mine. Why'd you put my name on that? Why'd you do that? Well, we pulled it from the system, and oh, well, that data's outdated. Okay, but that means you were looking at the numbers, right? And if they've never looked at the numbers before, that's an amazing first step. So yeah, I think being open to that pushback is an important reminder. That's a great point, Wyndham. Thank you. So if you think about value can come at helping the business become more excellent. It can help with improving their service, but it can also be like how you're supporting them or how you're building trust with the rest of the organization. So it doesn't have to just be about revenue. It can also be about operational efficiencies. It can be about fewer incidents. It could be lots of different ways that you're starting to think about and measure the value that you bring. And my clicker is just crazy this morning. I'm sorry. So when we think those metrics, here's some starting points that I want to do to kind of start the conversation, and then see if there are other ones that people have used. We actually have a big list of these, so I'm glad to share those offline with like the full-blown list, but I didn't want to take a half an hour just going through metrics this morning. I wanted just to be able to have some discussion. So we can look at trends in the revenue impact from IT initiatives. So those initiatives that you do, that investment that the business is making, how did the investment pay off for them, right? Like they're doing this for a reason. That goes back to the ROI of those projects, and the business saying how they're going to get better. Did they make more widgets? Did they sell more insurance? Did they fulfill more claims? Did they write more checks, right? Like what was it that they were trying to do, and did they actually achieve it? You could just do a simple exercise of ranking your IT services according to their business value. Now, you cannot do this in isolation, right? The nice thing about an activity like this is that it requires IT and the business to come to the table together, and for IT to understand the business priorities and the business values of how they're using this stuff, and the business to understand a little bit of the difficulty and complexity of what they're asking IT to do, like keeping this archive system up and running and in hot access so that they can look at old stuff if they need to twice a year, right? So a lot of times the business is making decisions based off of a lack of information and not really understanding the difficulty of what they're asking IT to do, because IT loves to be heroes. and they love to solve a problem. And the harder and more complicated the problem, the more excited people in IT tend to get. And so they don't tend to go, hey, you're asking me to do this thing, and I can do it because I'm a hero, but understand here's the implications of what you're actually asking for. And so if you could kind of chart out, and we use bubble charts a lot of times to look at the business priorities versus the difficulty and time investment from IT to find the matches and the best places you can get values. Again, going back after the fact and looking at achieved or realized ROIs. And it's a journey, right? You're not going to be able to do it for everything. Maybe you're just going to go, hey, we're going to pick our top 3 projects. Or maybe don't start with the top 3. Maybe go, hey, we're going to start with the smallest 10% because they'll be easier to measure, right? Just to start to do this. But you have to start somewhere. You're not going to do it for everything all at once, but you have to start somewhere, and for people to start seeing the value of doing this, to really understand how that's going to help things out. And then visualizations, right? Whether it's a heat map or a bubble chart or whatever your organization's preferred visualization style is, then kind of looking at that to be able to portray information and not always just using, IT finance, Excel charts and tables for conveying that information, so that we're trying to be business friendly about how we talk about these things as well. Do you guys have, and you can let me know in the chat, do you have today, or feel free to take yourself off of mute and talk, please. Do you have today a communication? I heard David say monthly BRM meetings, right? Do you have any other communication, whether it's self-serve or proactive? Do you have a dashboard where the business can go and look at information about IT service cost or value? Do you have any kind of communication platform, whether it's a web or something that's a PDF that gets sent out, or a database that they can query, or a person who goes and meets with them? How are you guys having this conversation with the business, and how often, right? So David said monthly with a BRM, which is a good way to do that. But self-serve is also a very valid and a helpful way to do that as well. So in the chat, let me know, how are you guys doing this today? What are the methods that you're using to have conversations with the business, between business and IT? And if you're not having any conversations, that's a valid answer. Just say, we don't do that here yet. And that's okay too. So you're using a dashboard. Carmen, is it like a web page that they go to, or how do they access that dashboard?
Actually, it's Empower, and they use that to look up their business services by their operation, and that helps. You may have worked with Alonzo and Heather, and they're the ones that worked on that on a monthly basis. So the business units, head operations can see exactly their IT spend in a big overall picture.
That's awesome. I like that. And then when you said you have a Power BI reports with a full service catalog with incoming and charge out costs, nice, coupled with quarterly SRM meetings, nice. David said in addition to their monthly BRMs, they have monthly enterprise investment board meeting with all business customers, provide periodic updates and notices. That's awesome. So you guys are starting to have these conversations. And so having these conversations, not just around cost, right? Not just about what did I spend, but what did I get for that spend? What was the value of that, right? So if you get a monthly grocery service, you don't just want to know like how much did it cost me for my groceries, but what did I get for that, right? Because the bill, you might be like $140, like this is really sucks. How much, $140 a week, what? But then like you look around and you have like all these marvelous, amazing things to eat, and your family is happy and you are sustained and healthy. That's worth the investment, right? And so when you do those conversations, it's really important to not just be talking about here's what your costs are, here's how much, you know, the GL is going to be impacted and you're going to have to pay back to IT this month or this quarter, but here's what you got for that as well. And so that's what I love about how David was saying they start that conversation, right, and start to talk about the things that they did for the business and what the business got out of that. I think it's a great start to the conversation.
And
Anybody
we usually
else?
call that a bill of IT. Is that common to use that terminology?
Yeah, so a bill of IT is a common terminology, Carmen, but used usually more for like the cost of a service, right?
And that's sort of what we're providing to.
Right.
And
right.
you made reference to a like head count.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that for like enterprise services that pertain
Nice.
to our employees. And
Nice.
then we do information regarding the cost of applications, depending on who's using it, where it's used, how much it's used.
There you go. So if you're getting to like an application TCO or being able to talk about the cost of an application, you're on that leap of just about being able to talk about value, right? So for example, if you could talk about the cost of an application, if you understand how the business is using that application, then you could start to have a conversation about here's how much the IT costs were to process claims last month. Right? Well,
Okay.
the business knows the value of processing a claim. Or, you know, here's how much it costs to run the warehouse where you're storing all of your widgets that you've manufactured, right? And so when you can go beyond just kind of here are the things that IT does, but talk about the value that brings to the business. We did these things so you could do this, right? And mapping it to their capabilities, mapping it to the value that they're experiencing. Oh, look, you invested $20 million in this new project that we said was going to be able to enable sales. And we finished this project, and 6 months later, sales are up 40%, right? So really being able to take it that extra step and understand how the business is using the things that IT is doing is when you start getting into the value conversation beyond just the cost. Does that make sense?
Take the time to do a translation for them, in other words.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Right? So we're used to taking finance terms and changing it into IT, and IT terms and changing it into finance. The piece we have to get good at is taking the cost of IT and translating it into business terms so we can talk about the value IT is providing to the business. Because then they understand, oh, here's how much it costs to process a claim. Oh, well, if I have a goal to process 2 million more claims next year, that means my IT costs are going to go up, right? Because every claim I process has a certain amount of IT costs. So it's unreasonable to think that I'm going to grow the business and not grow that IT cost when it's an integral part of what we do.
Good example. Thank you.
Absolutely. So this can feel overwhelming, right? It can feel like you have a million inputs and you've now become the nerve center of the universe. And that's part of why we want to start doing these conversations and having roundtables, because you guys aren't alone. We talk to people around the world on a regular basis, and I know that there are lots of you out there doing this stuff. And I want to start connecting you with each other and not just with Thavron. And to allow you to talk to each other and to start telling us, right? Like, we don't just want us to be out there as experts telling you what to do. I want to see the community grow to a maturity level where people are starting to give active feedback and that the community at large is starting to collectively decide standards and not just taking what somebody says as the standard that they should be adopting. Does that kind of make sense as a reason for doing these kinds of meetings and gatherings?
Absolutely.
Does to me, that's for sure.
Makes sense over here. Thank you, Nan.
Absolutely. So if we sort of do a summary, think about what you need to measure value. Obviously, you need first to understand the cost to develop and operate a service. That means understanding its dependencies, which is sometimes a challenge, as we'll hear as the day progresses, right? But it also means that you really should have a business case or understand the ROI of what you're doing, whether it's a project or just a regular operational business service, right? Like, if it doesn't have a business case, if it isn't making the business better at what they need, why is IT doing it? So we should understand both that it has a fit to the IT strategy as well as providing good business value. And that often means understanding the value stream. So for you guys in the chat, let me know what is your comfort level with the term value stream? Because this is something that's becoming very big in ITIL 4, right? Like, we've been talking about value stream for 4 or 5 years now, Charlie, maybe longer. And it comes out of industrial engineering, actually, and lean manufacturing, right? And like, there's a long history of what a value stream is. But it's new to IT in a lot of cases. So one of the things that we're thinking of is doing a learning session in the near future on value streams. So I'm curious, how many of you guys are like, never mind, I don't need any help. I'm good with value streams, and we use value streams all the time. To, could you please define that term? So, like, where are you in that? So it's a new term. Oh, it's a new term for a bunch of people. Okay. Anybody else? All right. So it sounds like, Charlie, we definitely need to put the value stream session in the slot we were talking about. Maybe we'll pull it to the end of this month instead of October. We need help explaining it to the business. That's interesting, Brian. Okay, good. Okay. Well, we definitely want to make sure that you guys are well informed on this, because it really is. If you are an ITIL organization and your organization is making the switch from 3 to 4, which started last year, value streams are going to be all around you. The whole concept of a service life cycle goes away in ITIL 4, and they talk about the value stream of a service instead. So, okay, we'll definitely need to schedule that conversation. But you can think about it, for this conversation, think about it as kind of, what are all the inputs it takes to get started, and all the things needed to operate it, and then what value does it produce out to the business, right? So whether it goes from vendor management and getting all of the vendor pieces in to how you build and deliver the service internally, to the impact that it's having out to the rest of the organization. It's its full value stream.
Yeah, value stream has been around since the 90s that I recall.
Yeah, I mean, it's been around
mostly in
from
manufacturing.
either IE or lean manufacturing for decades. It's been around for a really long time. There's actually like notations, and I'm really interested, Brian, that you need help explaining it to the business, because usually what we find is that for a lot of businesses, they already have value stream maps, and IT doesn't even have it. So you've actually had conversations with the business, and they're just like, they didn't get it?
We are an IT business. IT is our business.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I say the business, I mean the business part of this company I work for.
Gotcha. Yeah.
IT service provider.
Gotcha. Yeah. So they're kind of still in that IT. We find a lot of times, especially if you're a manufacturing company, but even in financial services, if you can get out of IT and into the rest of it, they actually know it better than IT does. IT needs to play some catch up. But if you're 100% an IT company delivering IT, then that becomes more of a challenge. So we'll do some more sessions on this and have some learning sessions as well as some roundtables about value stream. We've got some ideas about value stream metrics that people should be measuring and starting to report on for ITIL 4. So we'll look forward to those sessions coming up. As always, you can always get a hold of us by email or out on our website. And then with everything changing and shifting, we are doing all of our learning sessions virtually. So instead of using our classroom space in Indianapolis, we have just shifted to a virtual classroom. And you can find the sessions out on our learn.thavron website where you went and signed up for these sessions. So we look forward to having you guys continue to engage and to engage with each other and to build that conversation. Hopefully this got your brain thinking a little bit about the concept of value as we go through the rest of the conversations for the day. I appreciate you coming in early the day after a long holiday weekend here in the U.S. and your participation. I hope that you're able to continue throughout the day for things that are relevant for you. Does anybody have any questions or comments or experiences with value that you wanted to share at this point?
Nan, just something that we do from here is when we have project charters for approval, we do classify them according to, I guess I would say, a business value.
Nice.
Yeah. So they
Yeah.
have to they have to choose a business explanation for the project charter and project plan.
And so then the next step would be then, do they go back when the project's complete and see whether they met that original
I was
value in their
asking that
charter?
question, and we do not do that. It's on our project management's office wish list for the coming year to
There
do
you go.
that. And so they're aware that that would be a good goal to achieve.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, I just want to thank you, Nan.
Absolutely. So when, yes, the other sessions do continue on this meeting, we will stop this recording and then we'll restart it for the next session so that people who are interested later can pick up the recordings just for the sessions that they want. But you're welcome to pause, put yourself on mute, and we will restart the conversation again at the top of the hour. So thank you all very much.
Lovely. Thank you, Nan. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.